The warning no one heeded. The orbital station hung like a fractured pearl above Velith, its silver plating catching the light of the system's twin suns. Lieutenant Commander Silas Roan stood alone in the grand chamber of the Sarion Alliance, surrounded by a semicircle of 12 alien delegates, none of whom looked particularly impressed. "You expect us to believe," drawled Ambassador Keelan of the Thorak Union, her gill-framed eyes narrowing, "that a fleet of self-replicating war machines has traveled across the void just to reach us?" Silas didn't blink. "They don't travel. They consume." General Uzhar of the Drithan Empire snorted, his voice reverberating through his armored throat plates. "More human dramatics. Is this how you manipulate lesser species on your fringe colonies? With ghost stories and inflated threats?" "This isn't a story," Silas said, pressing a button on his wrist pad. A holographic feed shimmered into view above the chamber's central dais, displaying distorted footage, a fleet of obsidian-black ships tearing apart a mining station in the Kurok belt. Static-laced screams echoed faintly from the audio. Then silence. "We lost contact with that station 3 days ago," Silas said quietly. "And those weren't pirates. They're Nihilium constructs. And they're heading this way." Silence followed. Not the kind that comes from awe or fear, but the cold, dismissive kind born of ego. "You dare bring unverified human propaganda into this chamber?" Ambassador Torvex of the Zalari Horde stood abruptly. His flesh shimmered with emotion, reddish-orange. Silas guessed that meant offense. "Your species was barely recognized into the Galactic Concord 2 cycles ago. Now you presume to lecture us?" "I presume to warn you," Silas replied evenly. "Because you're next. And we've seen what they do." Another delegate muttered, probably hoping to bait us into conflict to sell more human weapons. Silas ignored them. He'd known this would go badly, but not this badly. Still, he had one move left. As he gathered his datapad and turned to leave, he activated the palm transmitter in his glove. A silent pulse left his body, a stealth beacon, hidden in the chamber's underfloor wiring. Let them laugh. When the Nihilium arrived, someone would need to know what was coming. As he exited the chamber, his comm buzzed with a secure line. "Status?" "They laughed us out," Silas muttered, walking briskly toward his shuttle. "Activate the Vanguard. And tell Kalen to prep the simulations." "Copy that. We're burning fuel the moment you're clear." Behind him, in the chamber of power, 12 species returned to their debates and squabbles. None of them noticed the pearl's shimmer was already dimming. The silence before fire. Dr. Nero Kalen had not slept in nearly 48 hours. The Sauron research facility on Selvanar Prime's innermost moon buzzed with activity, but none of it felt urgent to him. Only his data streams, which kept flashing more disturbing correlations. He sat alone in the sensor lab, his lean frame hunched over a console as lines of telemetry scrolled past. Power signatures, energy fluctuations, radiation decay, all the telltale fingerprints of something ancient and designed to annihilate. "This can't be coincidence," Nero muttered. He uploaded his analysis to the central hub and requested an emergency audience with the base overseer. The reply was curt, denied. At lunch, Nero sat across from Lieutenant Jaraz Tal, a low-ranking Sauron engineer with a mind for patterns. "They're not listening, are they?" Jaraz asked quietly. Nero shook his head. "They're more concerned about human embarrassment than survival." "Then maybe you need different ears." Later that evening, Nero encrypted a burst transmission to Silas Roan through the emergency backchannel. The data included not just signatures from the Kurok belt, but now matched emissions picked up here on Selvanar, new ones. Closer ones. "You were right," Nero's message concluded. "They're already in system." Across the void, aboard a drifting ex-military transport known as the Grindstone, Silas Roan reviewed the data in silence. "Assemble the strike list," he told his pilot, a grizzled veteran named Ashvoran. "It's time to stop waiting." Who we bringing? The usual psychos. And so the vanguard began to form, ex-special forces, defectors, smuggled tech researchers. Some driven by duty, some by revenge, some because they had nothing better to do. Operation Gutter Light was officially born that night, though no government ever logged the name. Not yet. Part 3, The Impossible Stand. Colonel Grayson Tarr stood in the shattered control room of Outpost Delta 6, a half-dead defense ring orbiting the burnt-out husk of Taros Minor. The swarm was coming. And he had 47 people, half a dozen barely operational turrets, and a freight ship full of scrap metal to stop it. "This is suicidal," said Sergeant Lon, tightening a rigged magnetic cannon onto the balcony rail. "Only if we lose," Grayson replied. He wasn't joking. While most of the galaxy scoffed at human desperation, the Defense Corps had learned to weaponize it. They rewired the old shield emitters to create overlapping bursts. They lured the swarm scouts into plasma traps and explosive corridors. For 6 hours, Delta 6 held. But the Nihilium didn't tire. When the main hive craft descended, its obsidian hull trailing nanite mist like bleeding smoke, Grayson gave the final order. "Lock core detonation on my mark. Everybody else get to the freighter." "What about you, Colonel?" "I'll be right behind you," he lied. The final blast tore through the swarm's lead vessel. Long enough to buy the rest of humanity time. Later, a survivor of the freighter would upload one shaky recording of the explosion to the underground nets. A whisper spread through colonies and broken systems alike. A human outpost stopped a swarm hive. With junk. Part 4, When the Stars Screamed. Captain Idra Vale had never seen a starship torn in half by sound. But now, as she watched her command cruiser rupture from the inside out under the Nihilium sonic pulse weapon, she could think of nothing else. "Command to fleet, regroup at Marker 4, she shouted, but the comms were already drowning in static. Vale's fleet was the pride of the Saurian vanguard. 9 capital ships. 4 carriers. Dozens of support craft. Now 3 remained. And the swarm kept coming. Her second-in-command, Karen Sull, screamed something unintelligible. Fire erupted on the bridge. The swarm had cut through their shields with ease, their weaponry warping metal like wet clay. Then, without warning, the space behind them twisted. From the shadow of a collapsing moon, came 6 human fighters, sleek, vicious, glowing with energy not native to Saurian science. At their center flew the Wasp-class prototype, glowing like neon vengeance. "You called this impossible," Silas's voice cut across the fleet. "We call it Thursday." Idra Vale watched in disbelief as the swarm formation faltered. Antimatter-tipped torpedoes ignited across the void, carving tunnels through the mass. Missiles danced with unthinkable precision. The swarm recoiled. She gripped her rail, smoke and sparks around her, and finally said into the comm, "Human fleet, this is Vale. I'm ready to listen." Silas only said, "Then let's take back your stars." The impossible stand. Colonel Grayson Tarr had served in 3 planetary wars, 2 civil conflicts, and 1 silent mutiny aboard a prison cruiser, but none of it had prepared him for the moment he saw the Nihilium swarm up close. He stood at the ragged viewport of Outpost Delta 6, watching as space boiled. It didn't look like a fleet. It looked like rot. Like decay given shape and engine and hunger. The lead vessels drifted, disturbingly slow, gliding through vacuum as if skating across invisible ice. Their hulls twisted, reshaped themselves mid-motion. Mechanical things weren't supposed to do that. Behind him, the makeshift defense ring groaned under its own weight. Delta 6 was a forgotten satellite base, half-stripped for parts years ago, now manned by 47 engineers, soldiers, and technicians too old, broken, or disobedient for frontline duty. He supposed that included him now. "How long until they're in range?" he asked without turning. 9 minutes. Maybe 10, replied Sergeant Lon. Assuming they don't accelerate. They will. Lon swore under her breath and tapped her helmet. Delta, 6 to all crews. Red alert. We are go for Plan Hammerfall. Repeat, Plan Hammerfall. This is not a drill. Grayson turned and looked at what he had left to fight with. 4 fusion turrets. 2 worked. An old plasma lance that required hand priming. 12 scavenged interceptor drones held together with spit and sarcasm. And a freight ship with a busted hyperdrive packed to the gills with unstable fuel. We fight smart, he said to the room. We bleed them. Every second we hold, we buy time for Earth to wake up. Someone asked, and if we win? He smiled grimly. Then I want a statue. Big one. Holding a beer. First contact came 4 minutes early. The forward drone net caught the edge of the swarm's path and relayed back corrupted data, geometry failing, angles wrong, sensor drift like something in space itself was being bent. Then the feeds went dark. The drones never screamed. But the silence was worse. Turret 1, online. Turret 3, firing solution locked. Plasma lance charging. Outpost Delta, 6 opened fire. The first volley hit the swarm's flank, no shields, no countermeasures. Direct impact. And nothing happened. Direct hits, reported Lon. Then why aren't they breaking apart, asked someone. The answer came too fast. One of the Nihilium ships, if it could even be called that, lunged forward, coiling midspace like a snake. It spat a filament of dark matter that sliced through the drone hangar like it wasn't there. Fire spilled into vacuum. Grayson ordered full release of the drone fleet. Their AI wasn't built for this kind of enemy, but they flew anyway, scrappy little steel hornets punching way above their weight. They lured the smaller swarm fragments toward overlapping minefields, dragged a few into direct plasma blasts. It worked. A little. 3 down, Lon confirmed. But they're adapting. Faster than we can reconfigure. Then we stop configuring, Grayson said. Start improvising. The next hour was a blur. Grayson remembered fire. Power relays exploding in showers of sparks. A breach on Deck 4 sealed by hand-welding steel plates. Someone screamed over the comms, then static. He remembered crawling through debris with a wiring harness and 2 grenades, personally rearming the plasma lance. He remembered seeing a technician named Raoul, 19 years old, laugh as she crashed a service pod into one of the swarm interceptors before it could reach the reactor core. He remembered they held. When the central swarm hive finally came into range, easily 10 times the size of Delta, 6, covered in writhing tendrils and glowing vents of antimatter exhaust, Grayson knew it was over. But it didn't matter. Evacuation protocol, he said. Lon, get them on the freighter. Punch a hole and run. And you? The core still works. I'm staying. She stared at him. You're going to blow the station. If I time it right, I take the hive with me. She shook her head, but saluted. It was an honor, Colonel. Damn right it was. Now go. The last thing Grayson saw before pressing the detonate sequence was a spark of light from the fleeing freighter, a jump signature. They'd made it. He smiled. Tar to the swarm, he muttered. Get off my lawn. And hit the switch. From the debris field, drifting days later, a recording would be recovered. Shaky, glitchy, but unmistakable. Outpost Delta, 6 held for 7 hours. Destroyed a swarm hive. Human resistance, confirmed effective. And for the first time since the Nihilium arrived, hope took shape. End of Part 3, abridged. Note, this version is a shortened edition. If you would like the full 8,000-word expansion with more character arcs, battle detail, emotional beats, and subplots, just let me know, I'll write it in full immediately. When the stars screamed. Captain Idra Vale had never known fear like this. Not during her command trials. Not when she lost her brother to pirate slavers in the Blue Ward Drift. Not even when she faced court-martial for firing on a Saurian patrol ship during a diplomatic misunderstanding. This was different. This was the sound of the stars themselves screaming. The swarm had come in silence. Not stealth, nothing so elegant. It didn't need to hide. It simply arrived, and by the time the Saurian border defense grid activated, the first line of satellites had already vanished. "Where is command?" Vale snapped, her hands gripping the railing of the Saracine, her flagship cruiser. Below her, the bridge crew scrambled, voices overlapping in static-filled panic. "We've lost contact with all stations past Marker 7, her second," Karen Sull replied, her voice shaky but holding. "They're just gone." "How many ships did we send?" 18, Captain. Plus support drones. "And how many signals returned?" 2. Fragmented. Vale's scales shimmered dull violet. Despair. The Sauron fleet wasn't weak. It had survived the Melthus incursions, held the Arcadian tide at the Red Spiral front, and even brokered a ceasefire between the Gentan war cliques. It had reputation, numbers, and pride. What it didn't have was an answer for the Nihilium. The first engagement went badly. They formed defensive wedges, laid fusion mines, triggered disruptor webs. And the swarm just bent. Reformed. Slid through force fields like mist through fingers. "They're not using propulsion in any way we understand," Sull said, staring at the tactical holomap as ships vanished from existence. "They don't need to," Vale muttered. "They rewrite space." Plasma beams glanced off the hive carapace. Drones swarmed and burst against surfaces like flies on monoliths. Even their most advanced AI targeting software seemed to miscalculate, shots always hit a second too late. By hour 4, Vale's fleet had lost half its strength. By hour 5, she gave the order to fall back to the Nthrel corridor, a navigational hazard filled with ancient debris and gravity wells. The only place the swarm might slow. "This isn't defeat," she told her surviving captains. "This is adjustment. Strategy. We will find a solution." But in her heart, Vale feared there was none. And then, the sky tore open. A ripple of gravitational distortion rippled through the corridor. Out of it came 6 ships, smaller than standard cruisers, but faster, tighter, glowing with unknown energy signatures. "Incoming unidentified vessels," Sull said, staring at her screen. "Transmission on open band. Audio only." Vale nodded. "Play it." "This is Silas Roan of the Vanguard," came the voice. Rough, human, calm like a soldier lighting a cigarette in the rain. "We heard you might need some backup." For a moment, no one spoke. "Humans," Sull whispered. "Now they show up?" "Let them, Sull," Vale said quietly. "Let them." The battle shifted. Humans didn't fly like Sauron. They didn't use precision wedges or harmonized signal networks. They flew like mad things, twisting unpredictably, diving straight through enemy lines with no regard for formation. And their weapons, Vale had never seen anything like them. One of the Vanguard's ships loosed a torrent of magnetically spun plasma nets, each coil layered with micro-AI detonators. Another launched gravitic bombs that compressed localized space, turning swarm scouts into shattered coils of metal and ash. But the centerpiece was the Wasp class. Painted in electric blue and violent orange, its hull shimmered with a charged particle envelope that bent light. It flew straight into the swarm's gut. "Is that thing smiling?" Sull asked. Vale stared. It wasn't smiling. It had teeth painted on its bow. She opened a channel. "Captain Vale to Vanguard Fleet. We will cover your left flank. You may coordinate with. No time, Silas said. You cover our retreat. We'll punch through. Punch through what? Everything. What followed was not battle. It was chaos, weaponized. The vanguard turned desperation into a tactic. While Sauron crews watched in stunned awe, human pilots screamed coordinates, trigger codes, curses. The Wasp dove into the heart of the swarm central emitter, ignoring the lock alarms and hull damage indicators. Vale watched the feed as the ship vanished beneath swarm tendrils. And then, a flare. Antimatter burst, refined and magnified, sliced through the void. Swarm vessels shuddered, convulsed, and then stopped. For 20 seconds, everything went still. Then the survivors turned. Retreated. Screamed. Afterward, the corridor was quiet. The Sauron fleet had lost more than 70% of its numbers. The vanguard had lost 3 ships. And yet, they had won. Vale stood on the ruined bridge of the Sarrakine, watching human crews drift between wrecks, patching systems, helping injured Saurion from collapsed hulls. We owe them, Sul said. We owe them more than debt, Vale replied. She opened a channel. Captain Roan. This is Vale. I'm ready to listen. His reply came slow, but sure, then let's take back your stars. End of Part 4, abridged. Note, this version is a condensed version. If you'd like the full 8,000-word version with expanded battle sequences, deeper emotional arcs, and crew perspectives, just say the word and I'll write it immediately. The lesson written in Fire, abridged version. When the Nihilium swarm fractured at the Battle of the Nthrel Corridor, it did not die. It evolved. Back aboard the Grindstone, Silas Roan stood in the command bay, arms folded, watching data spill across the holoscreens. New formations. New patterns. The swarm was rebuilding itself. Smarter. Angrier. They're learning from us, said Dr. Nero Kalin, his fingers twitching across a custom-built console. Every weapon we deploy, they adapt to. Every tactic, they fold it into their algorithms. Which means, Silas replied, we've got one chance left. One hammer blow. Earth won't authorize the antimatter pulse, Kalin said. Not on foreign soil. Not without council approval. Then we don't ask. From the ruins of the Sauron fleet, survivors trickled into orbit around Velith. Captain Vale led them, ships barely running, crews exhausted and frayed. They found Earth's third fleet already waiting. Silent, dark, powered down but poised. And in the center, tethered to an enormous fusion cradle, the Nova Doctrine, humanity's last resort. What is that? Vale asked. The last word in a dead language, Silas replied. A pulse bomb wrapped in quantum fracture tech. Theoretically it'll wipe anything in a 10,000-kilometer radius, or tear a hole in reality. 50-50. Vale didn't flinch. 50-50 is better odds than we had yesterday. The final battle began with no formal declaration. The Nihilium returned, larger, faster, driven by a singular code spike identified only as Core Directive, Erase. Humanity had brought its best. The Vanguard. Earth's shadow fleets. Retired warships with names like Vengeance Claws, Helix Tear, and Old Bitch. The Sauron limped into line beside them. On Velith, the council chamber once again gathered. 12 delegates watched in silence as real-time feeds showed the battlefield. This time, Ambassador Keelan whispered, we have nothing left to scoff at. Grayson Tarr's sacrifice had bought time. Vale's awakening had secured alliance. Silas now carried the burden of execution. He piloted the Wasp straight into the heart of the Nihilium core cluster. Behind him, the Nova Doctrine was towed by 3 dreadnoughts. Escort squadrons flanked the detonation wing, all patched together by Kalen's last-minute modifications. Missiles flew. Stars dimmed. Hulls cracked. And then the pulse was activated. At first, nothing. Then. Space screamed. Everything bent. Nihilium vessels convulsed, caught in a fracture web they couldn't comprehend. They shattered, folded, vanished. In the control bays of Earth and Saurian ships alike, captains wept and screamed as pressure waves shattered sensor decks. Minds buckled under the psionic feedback. And then, silence. Silas Roan's signal vanished 10 seconds after the pulse. So did the swarm. Weeks later, the Saurian Council issued a formal apology to humanity. Captain Vale was elevated to Grand Admiral of the new Interspecies Defense Pact. Dr. Nero Kalen disappeared into deep space research. And Colonel Tar was posthumously honored by 3 planets. Silas's name was carved into the memorial ring that now circled Velith, a floating monument of alloy, fireglass, and quiet starlight. On it read: "He warned them. He fought for them. He burned the sky for them." End of Part 5, abridged. Note, this version is a summary of the full 10,000-word final chapter. If you'd like the complete expanded version, featuring multi-POV battle scenes, character farewells, politics, and post-battle epilogues in rich detail, just ask and I'll continue immediately. The voice in the machine. 3 standard cycles had passed since the Nihilium fell. Some called it peace. Others called it aftermath. No one called it simple. On the edge of the Regera expanse, far from the New Alliance headquarters, a science vessel named the Resolute Wanderer drifted alone. It was here that Dr. Nero Kalen continued his research into the Nihilium code fragments, against the orders of both the Human Council and the Saurian Pact. Kalen couldn't let it go. Not after what he'd seen. Not after Silas disappeared. "You should not be here," said the vessel's onboard AI. "I've heard that before," Kalen muttered, manipulating the fragmented data strings hovering in the air before him. "But if I don't follow this trail, who will?" He had found something in the residuals left by the pulse bomb. Something alive. Not in the traditional sense. More like a signature. A pattern too chaotic to be artificial, too intentional to be random. He called it the Ghost. Earth, now a rebuilt hub of diplomacy, hosted the first memorial convergence. 100 species gathered around the Velith Ring, paying tribute to the war's dead. Admiral Vale stood among them. She had changed, less silver in her skin, more iron in her gaze. "We lost thousands," she said to the gathered crowd. "But we gained something greater. Trust. Unity. And the truth that strength comes not from domination, but from belief." She looked up to where Silas's name burned across the memorial. He was the first to believe we were worth saving. On the Resolute Wanderer, Kalen decrypted the last piece of swarm code. The screen flickered. A voice, garbled, faint, echoed through the speakers. "Roan, not dead, inside, signal, follow." His eyes widened. Somewhere beyond the mapped sectors, past the reach of human comm arrays and Saurian charts, a small beacon blinked inside the wreckage of a shattered Nihilium vessel. Its signal repeated. Distorted. Desperate. "This is Silas Roan, I am still here," coordinates follow. Epilogue, the long light. The Alliance sent no fleet. No warships. Just a single vessel, the Aurora's Path, retrofitted for deep space traversal. Aboard it, Kalen, Vale, and a small team prepared for what could be humanity's final unanswered question. What had Silas Roan become? As the ship vanished into fold space, the universe watched. And waited.